words. So those who are here probably know me a little bit. My name's Kerry Ward. I have this YouTube channel that I've been maintaining for quite a number of years and putting up content usually related to ultramarathon running, trail adventures, or travel adventures in different places. And today specifically, because we have a very special connection with Jeff Pelletier here, who is one of the few humans on earth who do the same thing that I do, which is go out and run 200-mile races and then film them and edit them and put them up onto YouTube so other people can share it. And I started doing this with the very first Tahoe 200. Wasn't quite sure how it would all go, but that ended up getting a little bit of traction. Then I did the Bigfoot 200 on its first year. And then I did the Moab 200 its first year. And then I got the Delirious West 200 on its first year. So, and amongst the various videos I put out on the 200 milers, I get a lot of feedback from people saying that they use it as a bit of a reference when they're considering doing really long mileage or they're considering doing a 200. So there seems to be some traction gained from that. Now, my friend Jeff here has been doing it slightly differently. So I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll get into a discussion where we're going to be talking predominantly, not just about the races, but about putting together videos, filming the effort, and then putting the effort out online so folks like you can watch this. And the idea is we'll also get on and answer questions that pop up. So there's a chat box on the side. You might have to fiddle with your screen a little bit to make sure that it's up on the side on the screen options in the lower right of the frame that you're watching this on. And you can send in questions as we're going. So Jeff, tell us your bona fides.
Yeah, hey guys. So some of you might know me from my videos. Some of you might be following my channel as well. But I'm a good friend of Kerry's here in Vancouver. I'm a trail and ultra runner as well, and a filmmaker. I've done a couple 200-milers myself. I've done a handful of 100-milers. I've done a staged race and a bunch of sort of fast packing adventures that are similar to 100-mile efforts, but more self-supported or unsupported adventures. I have a little bit of a different kind of filmmaking style than Kerry, but ultimately we're out there kind of doing the same thing, sort of documenting our adventures and trying to inspire people to go out and do the same. So we thought it would be cool to connect. We're always having these conversations on the trail, and often we're thinking, maybe these conversations, we could like open them up and invite you guys to ask us questions. So that's kind of part of what we're doing here, sort of pulling back the curtain a little bit. There's things we want to talk about, and there's things that I'm sure you guys want to ask us about. So we'll kind of do a mix of the two, I think, today.
So I've got a bunch of questions for Jeff. So if questions don't come in, I'll just feed, and you probably have questions for me as well. When Jeff says we have different styles, our styles are very different. Jeff is actually professional in the way he does this. His videos are edited far more skillfully than mine, and mine are usually much more long form. My videos are between 2 and 3 hours often, and I've developed a bit of an audience or subscriber base who like that format where I'm just sharing the whole journey. Whereas Jeff, how much material do you start with, and then how much do you condense it down to get to your final product?
It depends. I usually have about a 4-to-1 ratio, I find. So if I'm doing, well, actually, I should say I get about an hour of footage per day. So if I'm doing like a 5-day run, it often ends up being about 5 hours of footage, which I'll cut down to about 45 minutes. So shorter stuff, I'll get maybe, if it's a day thing, I'll get maybe a couple of hours. So I'll cut down to like a half an hour. So it's around that 4 to 5 to 1 ratio, about 4 to 5 hours for every hour of finished content. I try to shoot for the edit. In other words, I know kind of what the sequence of shots are that I'm going to be putting together. I'm kind of building the story as I go. So I try not to overshoot. Sometimes I do multiple takes of certain things, or if I'm talking to the camera, I'll do it a couple different times. But generally, I kind of know how I'm going to edit while I'm filming. So I try to keep the footage somewhat to a minimum, considering how much editing I'm doing. It'd be so easy to come back with 10, 20 hours of footage and have when you
do stuff that actually in a race, like we're talking about 200 specifically, will you actually repeat things a couple times, like run by the camera a couple times?
No, actually, no, that's a good question. So when I say I'll redo things, I don't mean I will go back on the trail and redo things. I will, like if I'm walking and talking, I'll kind of do a second take or something.
Right.
But I have a rule when I'm racing, I never set the camera down and run back and forth. I never do anything. I mean, already I'm losing a bit of time. Like, you're losing whatever it ends up being, 20 minutes to a half hour easily a day, just messing around with your camera and stuff.
Yeah.
You're losing focus a little bit. I'm losing energy because sometimes I'm holding the camera and not using my poles, but my rule, I will not backtrack. I will not literally set up the camera and run back and forth, do anything that's staged like that, not during a race anyway. I'll do that though on my unsupported adventures.
Yeah, I won't do that very often. Every now and then, just because I don't think that way as much. And then all of a sudden I see other YouTubers who have channels where you're just always setting the camera up and then walking past it and doing the Craig Adams thing, right? Craig walking away from the camera,
walking in the distance, and then the next is him rounding back to get the camera. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm usually in enough of a hurry, even if I'm on an adventure, that I'm not going to do that too often. So where you film 4:1, I probably film maybe 4 to 3 or even 3.5. I include almost everything. So I probably film a tiny bit less, or maybe about the same hour a day, but then kind of depends on what happens.
So what's your editing process? You edit mostly chronologically, I'd imagine. Then you're telling the story as it is. You're not leaving out a lot. So tell me about your editing process. What's the first thing you do when you sit down with your footage?
I will dump it all into my editing program, and it comes in chronologically. And I'll leave the beginning alone a little bit, just so I can go back to it once I've gone through and I've gotten a bit of the story. And then I'll just work through chronologically. I might have a section or two where I come back to something. I might go and report at certain moments and show progress on a map or something like that. But I mean, one of the reasons I started to do this at all was because I wanted to share this with people who will never be out there otherwise. My wife will never be out there ever, but she'll watch some of this and sort of get an idea for what happens. A lot of people aren't in what we'll call ultra shape and won't go out and do something like this, but like to see it and use it as an aspirational thing, or get there eventually, or they'll just never be from that part of the world or see that particular trail. So I like to share that story, and I never know what's going to happen until you go out and you have the adventure. So my process is pretty much take a look, let's go through, let's divide it up where it's necessary. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about stuff as we go through. If there's something relevant or there's a story that I learn about afterwards, I can kind of type it in and edit that part through too. Occasionally I'll do narration, but not that often. You, on the other hand, do things a little differently sometimes, because you do have good narration. When you do your narration, are you writing it out, or are you watching something and recording as you're watching?
Oh yeah, everything's scripted. Sometimes I'm sort of scripting. Sometimes I'm scripting during the run, where in the sense of not the words, but crafting the story a little bit. Yeah. And I think the one thing is with my films, they aren't always, sometimes I leave things out just because it's like, oh, that would just be too complicated. The story doesn't need that scene. I won't mention the fact that we got lost. It's, I want to focus on this challenge, not that challenge. So I feel like I'm definitely, I think mine films are more like films than documentaries in a sense. I am crafting things and leaving things out on purpose sometimes. And in that sense, they're less of an authentic experience. When you watch your films, you really get a sense of being there, and it's the experience, and you can, really see what it's all about. But mine are pretty crafted, and the scripts are 100% scripted for sure. It is the last thing I do. So I usually do the edit first, then I'll look for where the holes are. I'll look for things where I'm not talking to camera, which is something I have to really force myself to do, actually. Again, something you do really well. And so usually it's things where there's gaps in the story that I'll then write the script and record the voiceover. Yeah.
Josh in West Virginia is on. He's asking specifically about drone footage for the non-race situation, because neither of us would bring a drone on an actual race. But Jeff and I were having this conversation about drones the other day, how to use them.
Yeah.
And you talking about the holes in the footage. So Josh, in answer to your question, is the footage worth it? It's pretty spectacular in terms of establishing shots, showing the area, and there's nothing like it, but it doesn't come with audio. So that's one of those moments where I think, oh man, now I need some music. Like I don't generally use music in mine, partially because the digital rights nightmare with YouTube is such a pain in the butt. Can I tell you on this this one that we just did with Mike McKnight doing the FKT on the Colorado Trail there were a couple little segments that Mike had filmed where I wasn't pacing him. And so I had this footage of him out there, but he was also, unfortunately, listening to music on his phone. So I knew if you have a 17-second chunk or under, usually you can skate by. So I was making them under 17. And it came back and it's like, oh, you've got digital rights problems. You can't, this is going to be demonetized. This is going to have all this problem. And I erased one of it. They try and give you an option to remove just the music. I'm sure it's never actually worked for me.
Yeah.
But it took a full month for that to clear. I just re-rendered the entire thing, got rid of that section altogether and re-uploaded. Then I just left the other version sitting there to see how long it would take before it actually cleared, because I disputed the copyright. So drones are good for that kind of thing. They're pretty small. I'm getting to be a better drone pilot, but also getting the drone shot is tough. Getting the right thing. How do you do it? How do you pick where you do the drone shot?
For me, it's I think drone footage is best used sparingly. So I hate drone films where it's nothing but drones. It's like watching a time-lapse film. Like time lapses are cool if used very, very sparingly. So I think drone shots can be effective. I look at a drone as as a camera, like like something I might do with a crane or, so I like to use drone shots very sparingly. And I think when used that way, they can be quite dramatic and they can really have that dramatic effect. For me, it's more about, like, here in Canada, it's really hard to fly drones legally and it's getting harder and harder. So the way I look at it sometimes is it worth the possible legal ramifications of flying where you think you're safe and you're not safe? We can't fly in any provincial parks, national parks, or any BC regional parks, which means you basically can't fly anywhere. You can't fly on private property unless you have permission. You can't fly within Greater Vancouver because we're within controlled airspace. There's so many restrictions. You can sort of skirt. You can fly under the radar, pun intended. But you
the radar in my case is just the umbrella of ignorance. Like, I'm gonna fly it, see what happens. It should be okay.
But it can also come back to haunt you. So I think there's legal risk with drones. It slows you down for sure on the trail. When I filmed The Big Chill with Gary Robbins, I was pretty sure I was safe where I was. We're outside of the park boundaries, and but even that, it was a mad rush to get that drone in the air and then get it down safely. And it was a real stressful thing. I've started actually now relying on stock drone footage as well. So my Tahoe Rim Trail video that I did, I actually didn't fly my drone at all. I happened to find some drone footage that was filmed about 20 days before I was there. That was on a website that I have access to, that I have a subscription to. So I actually was able to get all this free drone footage. So I love using drone footage. I don't love filming drone footage for a number of reasons.
I totally relate. One of my struggles also is you carry the dang drone, you get out there, and then it tries to connect to your phone. It's like, hey, we want to do a software update, and there's no signal. You're thinking, what in the hell? How am I supposed to? Like, I dragged this thing out way up to the top of the mountain. Now I can't use it, or the wind is insane, and I've had the drone just take off, and I'm like thinking, Jesus, I hope this thing comes back to me, man. And
your heart's just.
Oh man, it's terrible.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. Raphael Kinney, is it possible to run and drone at the same time? Doozer, Ryan, he's a buddy of mine. I always do the Burning Man runs with him. Yes, you can, but it's a little bit more complicated. You can follow, there's active track, various drones will follow you, but you pretty much have to have the controller in your hand or run back to it. So little short shots, you can do that kind of thing. One other question here. We've got a question about training, different approaches from T-Tech. And then I also want to talk to John Marangiello. Do you have trouble with the shot affecting your moments on the trail? That's a really good question, because oftentimes the best footage or the most compelling footage is the stuff the last thing you want to do is pull out your thing and be like, hey, this is, and start to talk to it, because it just feels like it does remove you from it in some way, becoming the documenter and the person who's experiencing it at the same time. So I've gotten to where it's almost second nature. I don't know how you carry yours. I just have, this is my little setup. Usually I have a monopod like this that can go like this. If I really want to, I can set it down and run past it on the trail. But most of the time I have it just in my chest harness. I can pull it out, and within a second or two, I can start talking to it. And that doesn't really take me out that much. I know that it probably costs me a little bit of time and energy over the course of a 3-day, 200-mile race to do that. But it also gives me energy in some way, because I'm telling a story, I'm sharing stuff with people. But does it take you out of the moment? A little bit, but not as much as you might imagine, just because I've probably run with this thing and filmed for hundreds of hours now. So it's kind of second nature. It's like driving. Does driving take me out of the moment of having a conversation with someone? No, not necessarily. How about you? Does it remove you from the experience? Or is it hard to capture the real tough stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. That's the part that I have the biggest challenge with is filming the tough stuff. The lowest moments are so low, like you're so tired, you're so, that there's no way you would be able to film. But then there's moments where I'm like pretty tired, but not like, not the lowest low, but like pretty low. That's when I can pull up my camera. That's when I can go more on that automatic mode.
Yeah.
But in those moments, like I have had moments in races where I've thought about dropping. I didn't, but where you're like, what am I doing out here? I'm not going to pull up my camera at that point, because I am in such a low point where I'm like, what am I doing out here? Why am I making these movies? Like, you're just like, you have you're low on calories. That's where, unfortunately, it would be great to have somebody else filming you. Like if you had a pacer, right?
Yeah.
Because then they'd say, I can see you're in a shitty place. You're going to thank me later. And they film you. And that's where I wish I had other people filming me sometimes. But usually I'm like you, I can go in automatic mode. I can film myself. And sometimes it gives me energy. Sometimes when I'm really tired, all of a sudden I go into filmmaker mode and I'm jumping around getting shots. And then the second I stop, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm tired. I forgot, for a few minutes there.
Doozer, by the way, is fantastic at that, bringing energy to the camera. I've seen it in person, like on the Burning Man Ultra, you're running 31 miles, 50K. And towards the end of it, I'm like, man, I just want to get this thing over. And he's still popping and
you can
popping.
Just turn it on, eh?
But again, a 200 miler, that's a little bit more of a stretch. By the way, a couple quick things I want to say. If you're one of my subscribers and you are not a subscriber to Jeff, please go over to his channel, open it up in another window right now, go subscribe to him, because he does some of the best quality adventure and ultra films out there. And he also does videos that are very helpful with respect to gear and fueling and that sort of stuff. So go and jump onto his channel and subscribe. He has content, as I say, that puts mine to shame. So a couple other quick questions here. Training approaches. Tell us about your different training approaches from T-Tech. Weekly mileage and vertical gain. Hello from Poland. That's awesome to have Poland in the house. Must be late there right now. Do you want to take that first? Training?
Well, why don't you start, Carey? Because I know we talked about this the other day, and I'm curious. I correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't necessarily follow a training program per se. You're more of a more is more. You're out there doing adventures, and you happen to train along the way, right? You're just always doing something. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, as people will probably glean from the conversation, Jeff is far more organized than me, is more of an analytic behavior style than I am. And that's not me at all. My style and his style are quite different, which is kind of nice because there's sort of teaming up like that. Oh, by the way, one thing you're saying about teams, when I did the Moab 240, I ended up running a good portion of that with Cameron Hanes. And Cameron Hanes is an Under Armour sponsored bow hunter guy. Also a fantastic guy. Go and check out Cameron Hanes' Instagram at Cam Hanes or whatever. the guy is a beast and works hard all the time and he just did a 100-miler, finished in 22 hours. His son came out his first 100, the Antelope 100, and finished in 32 hours. So check him out. But he had this crew with him making content as he were going. I'm looking going, oh man, that would be so nice just to have someone, there going up into the La Salle Mountains, and you've got someone from Under Armour running along with the camera, and you can tell your story that way. That's a total different deal. So training for me, yes, it's more of I know I have to do a certain volume, and I know I need to put in my time. But you were saying you have more of an actual training plan, like I'm going to go do this each day. I just try and make sure that I do the work. And I'm an opportunist. So when it comes to various things, I like to jump in when I can. Like we were talking about, locally, there's a thing called the Peak Baggers Challenge. And there's a season that just opened up in the North Shore. There's 80 some odd peaks, and there's all these rules. If you go and visit all the peaks, you get up onto the leaderboard. I got a lot of friends who do it, and I hit a bunch of the peaks, but I haven't jumped in and actually registered. But because I had a friend going, hey, we're going to visit this one obscure peak, Underhill, I will jump in and do that, even if I had another run planned. So in terms of volume, I like to get maybe close to 100 miles a week for a while beforehand, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less.
Are you, Kerry, are you tracking that on a weekly basis and thinking, oh, I'm not quite, and adjusting? Or is this just retroactively you go, oh, cool, I did 100 miles. Like how much are you paying attention to that?
A little bit retroactively, with the exception of last year and Laz's great virtual race across Tennessee, which I competed in. And I was every day putting up numbers. And I had 4 months straight of 125-mile weeks every week.
Yeah.
But I'm also, with the long stuff, elevation is important. So I like to get my vert in as much as I can. In the 4 months of the great virtual race across Tennessee, I ran 2,020 miles. So 3,600 kilometers or something like that. And I did somewhere in the order of 300,000 vertical feet. So about 100,000 meters. And that wasn't for a particular race because everything was canceled, but it would have been really nice to have a race like scheduled in September or October there. It was long. So I'm considering doing Cocodona at the end of the month, at the beginning of next month, actually. And if borders are open, and what I'll do from this point forward is probably ramp up mileage and try and get up in the mountains and get up and down. It's more time on feet than particular miles or particular elevation. Yours is different, yeah?
Yeah, I follow a training plan. This year, I hired a coach to help me with the programming. I don't have a coach in the sense of weekly, motivation. I hire a coach just for the programming, so then I'll follow that program. Typically, what you do is you adapt that on sort of a monthly basis. You'll kind of meet again with a coach who will help you with that. For me, having a coach helps me to ensure mostly that I'm not overtraining. I think that's the biggest risk as ultra runners. We don't need the motivation, but we can overtrain. So reminding me that you need to take down weeks, and tapering. And so somebody to hold me back a little bit, a plan that I can follow somewhat blindly, where I'm not questioning what was I thinking when I made this plan? It's like, no, you know what? I paid somebody to make the plan. I'm going to follow the plan. And somebody where, with a coach, they're working with a lot of different athletes. So they have a larger data set to work with than just yourself. So I like working with a coach to create a program. I like following a program, but there is an opportunity cost there. There are opportunities where I had a buddy say, hey, do you want to come run on Friday? It's a holiday. And I said, I can't, it's my down day. I'm supposed to do some cross training. I got to run long on Saturday instead. So I'm going to not do that adventure because it's my schedule dictates it.
There's a question from Alex Dieter about this exactly. How do you manage the time between sports activities and not let one take over running? You're addressing that right now, actually.
Yeah. And so it's all about sacrifice, right? Like you can do anything, you just can't do everything. And for me, when I'm training for a goal race, it becomes the focus. I follow a plan. I also focus on time on feet. I track mileage, but I don't I'll have 3 hours scheduled, not 15 miles. And again, and as well, depending on the race, I'll adapt the type of workouts I'm doing, how much elevation, that kind of thing. I'm always, of course, trying to mirror the terrain that we're running, that you're going to be racing on. Here in Vancouver, we're super lucky. We have really technical terrain. We have big mountains. We can train for almost anything in Vancouver appropriately. The only things we don't have are elevation and heat. But as far as the actual terrain, we've got it all here. So we're pretty lucky.
Yeah. The elevation and heat are the elevation is, yeah, we've got that in spades, but the heat, no, we don't have. That's what killed me in Australia.
I was just saying by elevation, I mean altitude. We don't have altitude to train at.
Yeah. Altitude.
Yeah.
Altitude. So from Raphael, Kinney, what's a non-race route that's on our bucket lists? Well,
what do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we were actually talking about this specifically at some point last year, even before COVID, talking about the Jordan Trail, which is a trail that runs the length of the country of Jordan. It's about 400 and some odd miles. And Jeff and I were talking about maybe doing some sort of piece on it, thinking about taking it on kind of trying to aim for kind of a 2-week time frame. So 40 miles a day, something like that would be a good solid effort. But that's one I would like to do, because some of the videos that have landed well for me, and I know you've got like your Nepal Annapurna circuit videos over 1 million views, right? So those my Everest Base Camp is a popular one. My Kilimanjaro one's a popular one. My Salkantay Trek Machu Picchu is another good one. People like those kind of adventures. So I think the Jordan Trail would be one. There's a canyon in Namibia, which has about a 60K route through it, which I'd like to do. That'd be an easy day.
Is that like a slot canyon? What kind of canyon?
It's a big dry canyon, like almost like the Grand Canyon. I have to go and look up the name of it again, but I was studying the route and I saw a couple of trips that went on to do it. I'm like, 60K, that's a day. You could do that pretty easily in a day instead of bringing a heavy pack and camping. Any other trails that are for you?
John Muir Trail has been high on my list for a couple of seasons. I had a permit to do it this last year, and then the border shut down. So I put in for a permit again in 2021. So yeah, JMT. I would probably do it over 7 or 8 days as a bit of a fast pack. My list is pretty long, but that one's in the short term. One day I'd love to do all the big through hikes, PCT, AT, Jordan Trail, Israel National Trail. GR20 on Corsica, the GR10 all the way through the French Alps. I've got a pretty long bucket list. So, I think some of the best routes, that are high up on my list as well, they're not necessarily long. They're just, beautiful. Like even JMT isn't that long of a route relative to some other ones. I
would love to do that same trail. That trail looks amazing. I would love to.
The John Muir Trail looks just incredible. High Sierra Trail, the Colorado Trail. I have some sort of non-race but more running related goals, like Nolan's 14, Bob Graham Round. All the big sort of time-based running routes. My ultimate bucket list route, though, is the Great Himalayan Trail, which currently is at I think about 1,300 kilometers. It runs through the entire Himalaya. It's still being built, and it goes as high as 6,400 meters, I think, of the high route. And anyway, that's the dream route for me, is the Great Himalayan Trail, going through the entire Himalaya.
There's another question here from Josh. Actually, any interest in running the backyard ultra race format? Haven't seen anyone film one from first person perspective like you all do. Would love to see it. Backyard race, Jeff? For
me, that's a hard no. No, I like to suffer in beautiful. I like to suffer in beautiful places, not my back. Well, I mean, for me, our backyards are pretty nice, but not that format. I'm not a running in loops kind of guy personally. No,
I am not either. But the format is interesting. Like, I would not say no, 100% no. If there was one that fit in, I wouldn't use it as a big goal race. Mm-hmm. But I also, just the insanity of doing it again and again and again and again and again. I think like some of them are like the bigs is going up to 78, 79 loops. That's a long time and a long distance just to keep, grinding along. I don't think, like, a lot of what I do, kind of like you, is I take joy in the experience, seeing new things, having
Mm-hmm.
like the journey all the way around Lake
Mm-hmm.
Tahoe, or all the way from one mountain to another, and not doing the same 4.167 miles again and again. But it'd be cool to film it, because you'd have that degradation of your consciousness going and going and going. Filming it towards the end would be, oh my God, it'd be a nightmare. Like, because some of
you'd
the
have to have somebody else filming you, I think, because you would just be
on the stops.
you wouldn't be inspired by the surroundings. It's like, oh, I'm filming the same thing over and over again here. I think you would have to have an outside perspective filming you for something like that. That would be, I think,
yeah. So let's see here.
I should take it back. I've learned to never say never. There are things that I said I would never do that I've done since when I first heard about this crazy thing called a 50K. That was the Neenacker here, which traverses the entire North Shore Mountains on our that we see behind us here in Vancouver. I thought that was crazy, because I was training for my first marathon at the time, the BMO Vancouver Marathon. Even the Barkley marathons. I mean, it doesn't appeal to me necessarily, but I wouldn't, things change, right? Maybe I would look at doing something like that as well. Like you said, there is a certain intrigue. There's a certain kind of curiosity I have of, would I be able to do something as mundane as running around in loops 100 times?
That's like the question people answer, because the Barkley marathons has some interesting documentaries that have popped up. So it's entered the general consciousness kind of indirectly through Netflix and that sort of thing. So people see it, and your friend and my friend Gary is a featured player in that whole thing. Yeah. Gary Robbins, the guy with the big red beard, who is not quite finished with it yet, but one day will, is this character in this whole drama. So people find, are you going to run the Barkley marathons? Would you run the Barkley marathons? And my answer is kind of like yours, like, well, it's a tough ticket to get, and it's a miserable race. And realistically, if Gary's not finishing it, I'm not going to have any chance. I mean, if I can do,
you could go and do a fun run. You could do 3 loops.
Well, fun run
laps,
would be, that'd be like, nobody got a fun.
Yeah.
Well, I think Jared and who's the other guy who got a fun run this year, but the top 2 runners got a fun run. That's it. And the best female runners, ultra runners, and couldn't do a fun run. Yeah. And they were with Jam Jam out there for a long time. And, it's just, conditions are tough and challenging. So
if someone said,
here's a ticket, I'd take it. Like, yep, I'm there. I'll do it. I'm signing up.
But there's an opportunity cost as well, right? I mean, that's a race then. That's a different race you couldn't do then in place of it. So I think there is an opportunity cost for every race you do. I mean, of course, we only have so many running seasons in our legs, It's a lot, but it's still a limited number. And you only have so many races a year you can do, right? Like you can only do so many 100 milers and 200 milers in a year. And ideally it's not more than one if you're smart.
Not everybody is Gene Dykes, the ultra geezer.
Yeah, exactly.
Who is in his 70s and puts everyone else I know's race calendar to shame, with the exception of maybe Van Fan and Pam Smith, a few others that are just superhuman.
So that's the way I look at it. It's like, every race that's not like an A race for you, it's sacrificing potentially an A race you could be doing that season. That's kind of the way I look at it.
I did want to ask you a couple questions, because the difference between doing a ultra in North America, most of the time I can pack my car with bags full of crap and then get down there, and then but you're flying to Europe, so you're limited. So, how do you approach the packing?
Yeah, well, and I'm actually curious to hear about your perspective too, because you've run 3 North American tour, 4 North American 200 miles.
No, 3.
Plus Australia, and I've done 2 European ones, and you've got a few challenges, like you said, just something as simple as not being able to just fill up your trunk full of stuff. I mean, you think like, I can only fit so much in a bag. Okay, so maybe I don't bring that extra pair of shoes or whatever. Then you have the time change. And that's arguably one of the hardest parts about traveling and racing. So I got some really good advice from actually my coach at the time, who I'd hired to help with my programming for Tour des Géants, my first 200 miler, Eric Carter. And he does a lot of racing, skimo racing over in Europe. And he said, look, the sooner you can get over there, the better. If you can get over there a week or 2 in advance, like the sooner the better. Get over there, get your bags, if you lose your bags, you still have time to buy things, get settled in, just relax, just take it easy, unwind so you're not stressed out, adapt to the time change, get some sleep. And that worked wonders. So I was really relaxed. I think I got there 10 days early. I had a whole week to adapt and then a couple of days to get to the race. So that's the second part, is the time change. And then the third thing is that you almost are never allowed pacers in European races. Huh. That's a uniquely North American thing, to have pacers at races.
Are they bigger fields?
They're not always, but I actually think the main reason is that they are usually better supported, in the sense that it's rare that you'd go into a valley, say, and there isn't a little refugio, or that you'd reach a summit and there would be a little emergency bivouac or something. Whereas in North America, often you're in the middle of nowhere, literally just you and the grizzly bears. So it's a safety thing as well. I think, if you look at it the other way around, and the trails are typically better marked in Europe. So it's less so that you're not allowed pacers. I think that's just the default for a lot of races. It's more so that in North America, it's a safety issue not to have pacers. And then the last thing is, which is similar, it's just harder to have support, because if you want to have any friends support you, they have to fly over there with you.
Yeah.
So often you're racing without crew. Yeah. So everything is, the odds are kind of stacked up against you. Plus the fields are quite deep and very competitive. I mean, you're looking at, if you're a top 10 kind of runner at your local 50K, you're looking at top 100 probably in a European field. They're much deeper and larger fields.
Is that true with the 200? Well, I know probably Tour de Géant, yes. But
Tour de Géant is huge, yeah.
Swiss Peaks, how many people were in Swiss Peaks?
Yeah, Swiss Peaks was about 250. And I was still in the top 10 percentile. I mean, that's usually, in fact, Tour de Géant I was as well. But even that, I mean, some of the people who are racing, they're locals, they live in the Alps, they know those mountains really well. It's hard to show up and really show at a race like that unless you really are like a North American elite. It's a whole different level of racing in Europe. Now, having said that, that's what all those things I just mentioned can also be what might appeal to you. It's a bigger challenge. It's totally different terrain. Maybe you want to go out there just on your own. You do have a different experience running for a few days on your own without a pacer. Yeah. It really is like a unique experience, and one that I would definitely recommend everybody try once.
So another question from John. You remember your perspective before you ran 100-miler? How has the perspective changed now that you've both done over 200 miles? You want to go first? Or shall I jump into it?
I would just say I have yet to run 100-miler since I ran 200 milers. I ran 200 milers, and I was supposed to run 100 this last year, and it got canceled. It got postponed. So I'm slated to run my first 100-miler in July, since running 200 milers. And I expect it to feel very different. One night, what's that, Yeah.
I think for me, the first time I went over 100 miles was the Fat Dog. So Fat Dog 120, I did a video on that as well. And because I hadn't done it before, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. Kevin Vallée, I talked about this with you on the run the other day, made a good comparison. Kevin Vallée is a local explorer. He does adventures that are huge adventures, like across Lake Baikal in Russia, skiing the entire Iditarod, or running the entire Iditarod race, or, trekking across Indonesia and volcanoes. And he set a world record with two other guys, Ray Engels and Scott, I forgot his name, another polar explorer guy, from getting from the edge of Antarctica to the South Pole, 600 and some odd miles. And he said to me that, because I said, well, what's the deal? He was telling about packing. And when he went, the regular polar explorer guy was looking at his gear saying, oh, too much stuff. You don't need that. He had a big, mummy outfit for climbing an Everest type of thing. And he's like, nope, get rid of that. He's like, but that's my warm stuff. He's like, now you will never be in a place where you have to put that on to stay warm. Either you're going to be working, or you're in a tent and you're sleeping or cooking food and that sort of thing. And I think ultras, like doing Fat Dog, was that for me. You just need to get your body used to sustaining a low grade of intensity and suffering for a really long time, long enough that your body gets used to it and figures out that, oh, as long as I'm looking after myself a bit, taking in some food, I've got my mental faculties, taking in liquid, making sure you know where you're going. I know that I can keep going for a really long time. And I know I can also do it on a minimum of sleep, meaning a couple little naps here and there. That's a huge question that people always ask about the 200 milers. Do you sleep? Are you stopping in places and that sort of thing? And we can talk about that as well. But for me, before I've ever run 100 to then do a 200 was new territory again, because I knew that I probably would need to sleep at some point, just because your body is just going and going and you need that reset. And it's not without precedent that people go through the entire thing without sleeping, but they're zombies essentially by the end. Their mental faculties are not that great. But surviving that the first time, like if the first time I did this was the Tahoe video, someone go back and look at my Tahoe endurance run video and see that by the end, I'm almost sort of surprised. I'm like, well, that sort of went according to plan remarkably. I got through to the end and I feel okay. So that leads you to have confidence to be able to do the next one and the next one and the next one. And then it's just a case of committing to it and knowing that you'll have to do the work, and there'll be times with literal peaks and valleys that you're going to have to persevere through to get through to it. Same for you, or?
Yeah. I mean, I think 200 milers are just a whole different beast, and that's where they are multi-day races. It's 100 milers. There are lots of 100 milers you can do in less than 24 hours if you're a fairly fast runner. Western states, things like that. People are doing it in 20 hours pretty regularly. But a 200 miler, you're definitely looking at a few days. And actually, this is another difference between a North American race and a European race. Not that the European ones are harder necessarily, but they typically have more elevation gain up and down. And they're typically longer climbs. You get these climbs that are 1,000 to 2,000 meters up and 1,000 to 2,000 meters down. And you rarely get that in North America. They tend to be more rolling or even just runnable. Now, running is also hard in its own way and can be harder for some people. So something like the Moab 240 or Tahoe, I mean, any of these 200s, if you look at the finishing times, I mean, often the winning finishing times might be in the, 60 to 80 hour mark, I would say, right? And that's like you wouldn't see that in some of the longer 200 miler or some of the 200 milers in Europe. So, I mean, that's another thing. I still would love to do a more runnable 200 miler in North America, because I would love to finish a day or two earlier than I'm used to finishing. That's I feel like 3 days compared to 5 days is again a whole different experience. Because the difference between, exactly. And that difference when you're up to that 4 or 5 days, it becomes more like a staged race, where when you're racing for days and days and days, it's kind of about getting to that third day. The first day is fun. The second day is really hard. And then the third day, your body's like, okay, I get it. I see what we're doing out here, and it starts to adapt and it actually gets stronger. And then the fourth day, you're rocking. So there's this hump you have to get over. And in a 100 miler, you just don't have that. It's 24, 30 hours, maybe 34, 36 hours if it's a really tough 100 miler. But it's about a day and a half. So you don't have that journey of multiple days. And that's the main difference between 100 and 200. So I think when I go back to 100 miles, it's going to just feel so different because of that. It's going to feel like, it's one sunset and one sunrise. You just got to push yourself through the night. You're not thinking ahead to, but what about day 3? And that's really the thing about the 200 mile distance. We've had some questions around that, like about building up to 200 and things. And I'll just answer very broadly. I think there was another question about building up as a collegiate runner, I think, going to college for running. I'm very much in the belief of you should earn the next distance. You should have mastered, so you should, like, for example, I like the idea, and I did this as starting as a road runner, do some 10Ks, half marathons, learn about training, learn about speed work, learn about how you should structure your week, your month, your season. Because that's just easier to do on a shorter timeline, because you can do more races in a year. You can do a bunch of shorter road races and be like, okay, I think I know what this whole running thing's all about. And then train for your first 50K and do a couple of them maybe, and get good at this idea of being on feet for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. And then move to the 50 mile or 100K mark. And now you're out there for maybe 10, 12, 14 hours. And try to get good at that, because it's at that distance. You can do a few of those in a year. You can figure out your stomach, your feet, you're chafing, all that stuff that you end up taking for granted after a lot of years takes time to figure out. And it takes, unfortunately, making mistakes to figure out. And then once you've mastered all that stuff, you're ready for 100 miles. It's not about the physical part. It's about all that stuff that goes with it for me, all the logistics. You got to know how your stomach works before you go do a 100 miler. And it's not that you couldn't just go out and do a 100 miler tomorrow, but you're probably going to not finish it and you're kind of wasting your money. And it's kind of it's sort of like you're putting a lot of your eggs all in one basket. It's a lot of training to go out there and mess it up, halfway through the race. So I think it's like you earn that next distance. That's how I look at it.
So I of course have a slightly different take on it, which is Gordon Ainsley's story, which is how Western States was founded way back when. Western States was a 100-mile horse race, and his horse got sick or something like that. So he didn't have a horse. I thought, I'm just going to go out and run it. And people were like, no way, that's ridiculous. So was he training for it? Not in particular. Was he able to cover the distance? Yeah, actually he did. And that's how the whole thing started. So I think it's pretty audacious just to say, hey, I'm going to go out and hit a big distance thing. But if you're committed to doing it and you understand what it takes to actually pay a price to get out there. And so a question here, what sacrifices do you make for 200 you don't make for lesser distances? Do you try and record your GPS coordinates on your watch phone, Strava, for a 200-mile race? Yeah, I actually do. I try and have a good track of that. And I also carry a GPX so that I've got it the whole way and I can follow it. But in terms of sacrifices, I know full well, and I think most ultra runners are in a position where they know we're going to go out and get uncomfortable. And it's going to be, so you were asking, someone was also asking about an abnormally cold race, like the 6633 ever tickled your fancy. You're going to encounter conditions that are potentially extreme because you're dealing with altitude, you're dealing with things. I've been on runs where my bladder hose just frozen solid. And I'm like, okay, hopefully my bottle still works because I got to have something to get me to the next place. But the sacrifices are time and energy leading up to the race, an investment in figuring out what it takes to accomplish these kinds of races. That's the research part that Jeff was talking about. So you don't just go in it totally blind. But I think you can jump in maybe sooner than you might think otherwise. My friend Dax is a good case study in that. He heard about me running these 200s and he saw a video and he's like, oh my God, that's the most crazy out there thing ever. But I kind of want to do it. What do you think? So I invited him on a 50K run up to the top of San Jacinto Mountain out of, it's like a 11,000 foot climb from Palm Springs to the top and then back down. And I knew Dax he spends a lot of time on his feet and he's fit, but he's not a runner. So I said, hey, come and do this thing. It's basically we're hiking up the hill for a bunch of hours and then we'll do our best to run down and I'll kind of watch you and see how you do. And he survived it. He fell down the pot pavement in the end. It was like 106 degrees on the sidewalk, literally. And the guy falls down and he's like, that is the greatest thing we've ever done. Oh my God. And I'm like, all right, well, this guy's interested. Then he calls me up a little while later. He's like, well, I'm trying to do a 50 miler. What do you think? I'm like, great, do it. Finished well with that. And then he called me and said, I want to do a 100 miler. What do you think? I'm like, yeah, go for it. And so these are actually that's a video, Cactus to Clouds video. You can watch the Noob Does Cactus to Clouds. You can see Dax do that on my channel. And then I paced him in the Kodiak 100 and he won the non-elite part for that. So he's doing great. Calls me up again, says, hey, what do you think about me doing the Bigfoot? I'm like, yeah, if you want to do it, I'll come out and I'll support you. I'll pace you. So he did that. There's also a video of that out. Then after the Bigfoot, he says, I'm thinking about doing the Triple Crown. So a month later, the Tahoe 200 happened. And then a month after that, the Moab 240 happened. And I said, you know what, buddy, if you still feel like you're ready to run more miles after that, you should do it. But I can't pace you on the next couple. My schedule won't permit it. So you're on your own. And he went and finished strongly in second place in the Triple Crown after Mike McKnight went and obliterated all the course records that particular year. So I think you can jump in if you've got that will, that desire. And the price you have to pay is you got to be okay with being uncomfortable and suffering a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a literal price. I mean, I think, Tour de Jean, I saw a lot of runners who had towed the line who had never run 100 miles before. And I was quite surprised because I had run 500 milers at that point and a staged race. And I felt like I had, again, earned, like it was time for me to try the next distance. I wasn't there to see if I could, well, I shouldn't say that. 200 miles, anything can happen. Even 100 miles, anything can happen. But I felt less like I was there to see if I could finish. It was more about executing my plan. It was a question of how quickly I could finish, not if I could finish. At least that was my mindset. And there were other people who had never even run past 100 kilometers, and they were going to do it for the first time, and then 100 miles. They were going to do all this for the first time, and that's great. I commend that. Unfortunately, I don't think any of them finished that I know of.
Oh wow!
I don't know of a single person who's went to Tour de Jean and finished it who had never run at least 100 miles before. And so I think that just goes to show that there's so many things that can go wrong, and the problem is that's $1,000 race, 600 euros, and you have to fly.
They're all $1,000 and 200 miles.
So you're a few $1,000s in. You've trained for months, and then you kind of go, oh well, I guess that was cool. I mean, I got a little bit further than I got last time, but did you really learn anything? Like, how can you apply that to the next one? I think instead, those people would have been better off finding a race they knew they could finish. They would have created a plan, executed, and then learned from that. And you iterate your way there. But that's just me. That's because I am a very logical, rational person. But that's what's worked for me. And obviously there are outliers. There are people who do it. But I also see a lot of people where that kind of doesn't work out for them as well. So there is that literal monetary cost as well. Plus some of these races are hard to get into. So
yeah,
once you're in, you better really be ready for it.
Yeah. As holding up the placard for the illogical, irrational people, I still say if you want to try, go for it. It is
totally. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? You don't finish. I mean,
exactly. And a race is actually a good place to play with your boundaries because you are tracked. You've got a spot tracker usually, so people know where you are. You're not just going to go out in the woods and get lost.
Especially in North American race. Again, you have pacer, crew, all that kind of stuff. So it's
I got another question for you regarding the racing stuff. So I'll have, this is what I was using for some of the stuff, which is a Kogalla light, and it comes with a battery, big chunky battery like this, which is kind of heavy, but this enables me to recharge my phone, which you have to do multiple times, particularly if you're using it to record a Strava track and take pictures and do video and use it to follow on GPS. So I'll take this and maybe another one like this and stick that in my pack, and it's weight for sure. And I'll have maybe 4 or 5 GoPro batteries, and I'll have at least another camera or 2 with me. What do you carry? How do you deal with the charging and that sort of thing?
I, especially when fast packing, but also racing, I err on the side of having more batteries as opposed to trying to charge. So like you, I have a half dozen GoPro batteries, so I don't have to charge in the go. And I have my watch, the Cinto 9.
What's the new one?
Get this up. Well, it's new. No, this is a couple years old, but it's their sort of top of the line one. I can get a good, even at the best GPS setting, when you tweak a few of the settings, you can get a good 50, 60 hours. So I can do a 100 miler, no problem. And a 200 miler, I only have to charge once, maybe twice. And I'll do that at an aid station. So I won't carry the battery bank. I'll have it in my drop bag. I try not to charge though. I try to keep it simple. Again, the watch is the one exception. I have been known to carry a little power pond and a buff and sort of charge on the run if I have to, or just stick it in my pack. But fortunately with these new watches, you don't have to worry quite as much. I don't use my phone. I keep my phone usually off or on airplane mode just for photos and emergencies. I don't use it for navigation. I load the route on my watch for that reason. So I keep my phone. So I try not to do too much charging and stuff on the run. Especially when it's cold, batteries just die and they don't charge as effectively when they're cold either.
I've had, and they also, the GoPro's batteries are almost worthless in the cold.
Yeah, it's true.
I've had the wrist mounted GPSs that I've used for but inevitably after a couple of years, they just kind of go away and I don't replace. So right now I'm mostly just using a phone for tracking. Although I mean, I'd like to at some point jump back in and get something, but the battery life is always the thing that
the new watches are incredible. The Sunto Vero 9, it's an investment, and also I think it might even be on the beginning of the stream there. I don't know if it was already broadcasting. I got the new Corex Vertix as well that I'm going to be comparing, which is supposed to be even better than the Sunto Vero 9. So it's made for guys like us doing 200-mile distances, from what I'm told. So
yeah. Well, I'd love that, to have something that's reliable like that, and just to have the phone, because I'm always when I'm using this, I'm always scared that I'm gonna ignore the battery going down and then lose my track partway through. So I have to.
I have a pretty strong opinion just around that, because just a watch is just the form factor. Like, these are made for adventure. They're made to be cold. They're made to just work. And a phone is more of a luxury item. It's not as bomb proof. It doesn't work as well in the cold. Right. It just isn't, it's not quite as, it's kind of like comparing this to an Apple Watch. Like, an Apple Watch is great when you're inside. I wouldn't take it on the field. And so I just find that loading your route on this, and you're more likely to not have problems with the watch than you are by messing around with your phone. And again, then you want to save your phone in case you need to actually make a call. So that's sort of my opinion on I really don't like using a phone for navigation. The only exception is I will use Gaia on my phone more if I need to, like, where am I? I'll pull up Gaia, but I'm not using it like hour by hour, because it's just going to die. And I'm going to
all right. You're shaming me into getting another GPS watch.
I think you need a watch, Gary. I think you need a watch sponsor. In fact, somebody give this man a watch.
Yeah. So that's right. That's right. And Josh saying we really need a new gear video from you. Maybe I should get one and do a video on it for sure.
There's a question there, Raphael, just specifically about UTMB versus Hard Rock. I think if you want to compare races, honestly, what I always do is, assuming all things equal, just look at the finishing times, look at the winning times, look at the median times, and sort of look at like what the cutoff is as well. The cutoff can tell you a lot about a race. Almost always, the longer the cutoff, the harder the race, because they have to make it, and almost always the faster the finishing times, the easier the race, or the more runnable, I should say, not necessarily easier. There are exceptions. New races, often those times haven't quite been tweaked yet. Sometimes cutoffs are too aggressive, I've found, on new races.
Yeah.
Bigger fields will have more aggressive winning times. But again, you can control for that. Like, for example, Hard Rock has a 48-hour cutoff for a 24 miler. That tells you a lot, or 100 miler rather. That tells you a lot about the race. And yet it does have some fairly fast finishing times, but that's because Killian goes and runs it every year and sets a new record. So control for the elites, look at those times. So to answer your question directly, UTMB is much more runnable than Hard Rock, if only because it's at a lower altitude. So you're not dealing with the altitude. Hard Rock goes above 14,000 feet 2 or 3 times, and you're up around 13,000 feet quite a bit. Makes it very difficult even for locals. The terrain is also more difficult. It's got a lot more climbing, and it's also more technical terrain in my experience. I've seen half of the course, and I've seen quite a bit of the TMB as well. And it's definitely, the TMB is much more buffed out. So TMB is a much more runnable race.
Interesting side note, just this week, Candace, the Destination Trail race director, visionary, who started with the Tahoe 200 and does the 3 200s, Bigfoot and Moab, just announced that those 3 races are now going to be Western States qualifiers. Although, interestingly, addressing what Jeff is saying, they're not taking the cutoff time, they're making it a little bit more aggressive. So you might have 102 hours to finish the race, but you have to finish it in better than 80 hours in order to qualify for Western. So that, again, gives you some sort of assessment tool, I guess.
I'm curious to hear, I think the answer is no for you, but Carrie, have you ever DNF'd? Have you ever given up because of mental weakness as opposed to like an injury or something?
Any race that I've done, I've finished. I've come close. The closest I came was when I did the death race, and I made some mistakes with nutrition and going up Mount Haney or whatever it was. And about 2/3 of the way through, I ran out of water and I was vomiting all over the place because I'd taken in 2 gels at once. I thought, I really need some calories now. And my stomach just wasn't having it. and I needed to finish within a certain time and immediately drive to the airport and fly over to do some work. And part of me was thinking, okay, I'm in a very inconvenient place to get out of the race here. And I'm stubborn enough that I'm not going to go back down. So I'm going to go to the top. And then I go to the top, and inevitably you're going to feel better when you get to the top. And I had a drop bag there with a different pair of shoes. And I knew it was a long downhill afterwards. And that was like getting reborn on the downhill. So that was the closest I've come in a race to not finishing what I set out to do. So that's in answer to Pranav. How about you? Have you entered a race?
No, I had one DNF, and that was a 50 miler, the Mount Hood 50 miler, only because I had an injury, and I shouldn't have started anyway. It was one of those, like, I was like, oh, I'll see how far I get. And I got 10 miles in, and my leg locked up. So no, it wasn't, it was more just like I made the smart move and stopped running. I did, though, I should say, I had a moment in Swiss Peaks that I was considering dropping, and it was, I just wasn't, I think I forgot why I was there. And I wasn't as hungry as I thought I would be at that point in the race for the finish. Yeah. And that told me something about it, that I felt like I was burned out. Like I felt like with Tor des Géants, it was all about getting that first 200 miler under my belt. And I was excited and I was fired up, and I never had a moment. But then in Swiss Peaks, there was a moment where I was just, and I think I was just tired, and I was just hungry, and, I was just in a bad mood. But ultimately I was like, but what would I tell myself? What would I tell other people? What would my reason be for quitting? I had no good reason. I was healthy. I was moving. Yeah. I was in 20th place. It didn't make any sense. So I kind of went, oh, I guess I got to keep running. And then I was happy, of course, an hour later. So, I mean, in a way, I guess that's, I don't know, maybe those are conversations we're always having with ourselves in our head.
Yeah. I had a down experience for Delirious too. Went out to Delirious, and I've been training. I had good training actually for the most part. But a lot of my training was here in Vancouver in snow during the winter. And then I flew over to Australia, and I'd done a little bit of studying, taking a look at what the temperature should be. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of saying, 25 degrees Celsius. So, 70s and Fahrenheit-ish. And I thought, I should be okay with that. And the day of the race ended up in mid 30s Celsius. So 90 plus Fahrenheit and humid as a mother. And I knew I felt fine in the morning because it was the temperatures were reasonable, but then this humidity and heat started, and I felt my stomach start to go. And this is where experience helps. This is where I think that if you're new, maybe you do like you freak out and say, hey, okay, this is not going well because I'm about to throw up everything and I'm feeling terrible. To where I knew I was like, okay, if I throw up, I'm losing my calories, and I don't want to do that right now. I don't want to be in deficit. I don't want to lose that hydration. And if I keep running, that's going to happen for sure. So it was, at that point, it was fairly flat, sandy roads and, trails and stuff. And I just said, I have traveled so far to get here, and I have paid my money, my, $1,000+ to get here, and an entry fee and all that. And I'm going to, and I'm telling this story. This is where filming sometimes helps. It's like, I'll be damned if I'm going to then go, oh yeah, I guess this wasn't my day. I'm like, I'm going to suffer through until I start to feel better. And the experience of having done several of these and knowing that you go through both the mental peaks and valleys, the literal peaks and valleys, the nutritional peaks and valleys, I knew that it would get better at some point. It'd be tough, but it would get better. So I was able to prevail and get through that race, the Delirious race. Again, that video is up as well. But I didn't finish as I imagined I would have. I thought it would have been probably my fastest 200, just based on profile and all that, and elevation. And it was ended up being my slowest. But that was me making a conscious choice. Like, I'm not pulling out of this. I'm gonna stay in. I see that sometimes. Some part of me is just a little disappointed or crushed on the inside when I see somebody who I know is an amazing runner enter a race and they get 3/4 of the way through and they go, oh yeah, it's not my day. I'm like, not your day. You only got 25 miles to go. If you have to crawl,
or the flip side again, going back to Tor des Géants, I remember the very first day we were like 20, 30 miles in, and there was a guy from the UK that I saw at an aid station. He was sitting down, he wasn't looking so good. And I sort of said, hey, especially when you see somebody who speaks English, it's like, oh, hey, how's it going? But when you're in Italy, and he's like, oh, no, I'm done. It's not my day. I was like, what do you mean? Like, are you injured? No, and he gave me some excuse. And then he said something about his wife waiting for him. And I'm like, well, you're what? She knows you're doing a 5-day race. What are you talking about? He gave me excuse after excuse. And I was like, well, hold on. So you're not injured. You're not sick. You're just, and I was like, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try to play, kind of give him some tough love here. So I said, what's your bib number? I was like, look, if I'm going to hunt you down afterwards online and give you a hard time if you drop. I want to see you at the next aid station. Like, I was like, you have literally 130 hours left to finish this race. You have nothing but time. You could go sleep for 8 hours if you want and still finish this race. Like, you have no excuse. You took somebody's spot. Somebody else wanted to do this race and you took their spot in the lottery. You flew from the UK, and it was day one and I couldn't understand it, but he had already given up. And I think he just didn't, I don't think he towed the line with a good reason for being there in the first place. I don't think he knew what he wanted to do that race for because he forgot so quickly.
Yeah.
10 hours in, he was ready to quit.
Some of that is just the mental fortitude and the toughness.
Yeah.
And there's the, Mike ended up running a bunch of the race, the Antelope 100-miler with Cam this last weekend or whatever. And there's a good quote from Cameron when he's nearing the end. And Mike sort of says, how you feeling? And Cameron goes, man, I wish we had another 100 miles to go.
Yeah.
It's like,
there you go.
Not quite done with my suffering just yet.
Yeah.
So that's pretty funny.
There's a question back earlier that I want to address. Alex, I think it was, asked about what age, what's too young to run 100 miles or 200 miles. And maybe I'll answer that first here. I don't think there is an age. I don't think there's a specific age, but I would just say, like, disclaimer, I don't think running 200 miles is a healthy endeavor. I think there's things that I love doing it, but hey, my doctor that I went to, I have to find a new doctor because the last time I went, she made me promise I wouldn't run another 200 miler. And it was mainly the sleep deprivation. I don't think she's right. The sleep deprivation is not healthy. There are things that are excessive in life, and that arguably is one of them. And I only say that because it's one thing when you're like in your 30s, 40s, like 50s, but maybe if you're 18, 19, maybe that's too young. Maybe your body is still growing and your brain is still adapting. That might be too young for 200 miles. I don't know that that's a hard and fast rule, but I don't know. That's, I don't know. I don't think that running 200 miles is healthy at any age. So maybe that is something that's better for later in life. That would be maybe what I'd say about that. I don't know. What do you think, Carrie? Would you encourage somebody
it depends on the person very much. Although I choose not to put the limitations on there. Like if I had a doctor that said, you shouldn't be running, I'd be like, you know what? Screw you. Yeah, I need a new doctor. Yeah. I need somebody because I just know too many people who are healthy, way healthier than the average American, who run these long distances and put their bodies through these things. So is a 200 miler a healthy endeavor? Well, there's probably a little bit of wear and tear that goes on, but it's also kind of like an extraordinary thing. I almost look at it like a 3-day meditation or something like that, where you are mindfully aware of your surroundings and you are peeling back the layers of who you are and what you're doing physically, mentally, emotionally, nutritionally. You are just peeling back layers, and that does not happen very often. And when you get deep into one of those races and you're in that place where the doctor might say, oh, well, that's not healthy. You paid your money. You paid in sweat, blood, tears to get to that spot. And that is where you're creating value. There's this concept in Japan. This is something I've been playing with. It's a kintsugi, which is, I'm not sure if I got the word exactly right, but the idea is you mend broken things together and with gold. So like you put the bowl together that's been broken and you put gold in the various cracks, and that gold makes the broken thing more beautiful. And I think that running a 200 miler, to get to that part where you can break yourself to the point where you are filling in with gold and making yourself stronger, making yourself more durable, giving yourself, there's this concept of grit. And they did a study on survival of various life-threatening things. And what they found was older people were often, even though they were in not as good shape as the young people, old people would get through that experience and live, where the young people would die. And that's because they'd been, again, my view, they've been broken down. They have that grit. They have that, they've been broken and then built up again. And they have that gold lining, like the thing that makes it more beautiful, more valuable. So I think, you can still do that even when you're young, even if you're 18 or whatever. So that's my approach.
There is maybe one other thing to look at, though, which is the physiological, I guess, as a runner. And this maybe, again, is depending on what your goals are. I mean, if you're a collegiate runner and you're quite fast and competitive, you might want to exploit your speed, your relatively high VO2 max, which is not a everlasting commodity. That's going to start to go away when you hit your 30s. Your natural speed, you probably have more fast twitch muscle fiber than slower twitch. And it might be smart if you're while you're in your 20s to really exploit that and have some fun racing some hard 50Ks, running fast, because you've got lots of time to go slog it out in the mountains with us when you're older. Like that's, you can zombie march all day in your 40s and 50s, but or 30s, 40s and 50s. But when you're in your 20s, you get a special kind of speed that you start to lose after a while, because that is where there is a physiological change that happens in your training and your racing for a 200 miler, where you do develop a lot more slow twitch muscle fiber. You lose that kind of explosive speed. So that's maybe one argument against running long, is that you've got lots of time to do that, but you don't have a lot of time to run fast.
There's an interesting conversation that relates to this somewhat in the climbing world. Arguably the best climber in the world, one of the hardest route accomplishers, sport climbing and Olympic climber, Adam Ondra. And he is climbs at a level that few people will ever achieve, has been able to climb the hardest things in the world. And then Alex Honnold, who is also a phenomenal climber, a little bit older than Adam, and can do stuff that, with the free soloing and some of the routes that he's been able to climb. He can climb very difficult route too, but they're having this conversation, and Adam's saying, and he's asking Adam, what is it that gets you up these things? He says, well, I just love being on the very, very edge of figuring out barely what's possible. And Adam says, but you climb at a high rate too. And Alex says, actually, everything I do is kind of within my comfort zone.
Yeah. He earns it, right? Alex earns. In fact, I should sort of interrupt, but that idea of earning your next distance is actually something I got from Alex in his TED Talk. He talked about earning the next climb. He never jumps a step, because for him, it's life or death. If he skips too far, it's life or death. So when he's on that next pitch, he belongs there. He's earned it. And that's you could look at distance in the same way. But
translating that to running, Adam is the young buck who's running fast and hard as he can, all this stuff. And Alex Honnold's over there going, man, that guy's working his butt off, working so hard. That just does not look fun to me. I'd rather just have the slow burn all day long, like Kevin Vowley going to the North Pole, or South Pole rather, where he's like, it's just like slow cooking turkey all day, all day, all day. That's what we do. You can't do it in sprints. So it's a little different.
It's spreading the pain out and doling it out over a very long period of time. Because what I like about it is you can think your way through it. I think that is something that longer distance athletes, true endurance athletes, where it's in my book, endurance is more the mind over the body. It's telling your body another step. Whereas fast running, it's like shutting off your mind, in a way, like running on a track. You're not thinking, okay, step. Whereas with 200 miles, multi-day, it really is going like, come on, body, we can do this. Like, just keep going. Like you're operating a machine, at that point.
There's been a couple questions about routes, how we find things, how we do research and that sort of thing.
Apps and stuff. Yeah.
Probably a little bit different, but if we talk specifically about some of these big adventures, like running from one side of Zion to the other, 50 some miles, or doing the rim to rim to rim. So it's, again, a little over 50 miles, or some of these races. We'll take a look on a map. There's a couple things that are particularly important. Is there actually a trail? Like, will you have issues navigating or not. And
Yeah.
if you're accustomed to following a line on a GPX line and you can download the route, which is never a guarantee that it's exactly the same, but it gives you an idea if you're going in the right direction. That's a big confidence booster, especially on trails where there's multiple choices and things like that. And the other thing is it traveled enough that it's not ridiculously technical? Are you going to have to go over trees and climb stuff and go down? Or is it going to be a route like rim to rim to rim, which you can pretty much run the whole thing, even though there's some stairs and stuff like that? And the other thing to know is elevation and altitude. Is it high enough that you're going to be sucking wind, or you're going to have to worry about, any type of altitude adjustment? And is the elevation packed in a space where you can actually keep your momentum up because the gradient is not too bad? Or is it like this and you're just going to have to suffer it up or suffer it down? So those are the things that we'll take a look at. I will take a look at the satellite as well. I'll go in on Google Earth and I'll take a look at the site and see what it looks like and try as best I can to put it in my head so I know roughly what to expect as I go through. And I'll talk to people who have experience. Someone like Jeff, I'll say, hey, what are some fantastic things you've done? And we'll share intelligence that way, and or stupidity that way, depending on what the route's like.
Yeah.
And then go out and hit those things in a similar fashion, so we know someone's been there and what to do. And sometimes it's just, oh, you got a thing, great. I'm along for the ride. I hope you look at the map at some point, but I'll jump onto your adventure. About the same for you for looking at things?
Yeah. And the only thing I would add is, and basically it's echoing exactly what Kerry said, is the more data points, the better. In other words, grab that GPX file. Also look at that trip report. Also call your buddy who was just there, because things change season to season. I expressed this idea in my last video, my fast packing the fat dog course video. Kerry mentioned that race earlier. And it was about water sources, and water sources can dry up in a matter of weeks. So you need recent data, and the more data points, the better. So you can't, just when you think you're done, it's like, maybe I'll just call it one more buddy because I know he did it, 3 weeks back. So the more data, the better. And it really does depend. Is it a national park where the trails are buffed out and marked, or are you doing backcountry? That's also going to change. Obviously, the less marked and things, the more research you're going to want to do in advance.
Pranav has a couple interesting questions here. One is, what's your personal why for running long distance? Is there such thing as a bad why? And then I'll jump down to his second question here is, how did you find your ultra running friends? Like, we have a connection basically through running, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the one thing I would flip that around and just say that ultra running, or running, trail running especially, but also road running, is a great way to meet people. They're amazing communities. So it's not about finding running friends. I found running through friends, or at least trail running. I started road running. I started training at a facility, this lab that was here in town, and turned out they had a whole bunch of crazy people doing these things called ultra marathons. And that's how I learned about ultra running, was through friends, through mentors.
So for me, I think that there are various experiences that human beings have together, which are bonding. And one of the things that bonds you faster and deeper than almost anything else is going through some of these highlight and low light experiences, which can be, you're reaching your physical limit, you're going through things where you're in the middle of the night, darkness, having to overcome obstacles that are, literally mountains, or obstacles that are challenges in nutrition or navigation or whatever. Like, I know that I've had connections with people who I will consider lifelong friends, even though compared to many people in my orbit, I've had less time, volume, days with those people. But because we've shared time on the trail with in an ultra marathon, I am immediately more connected and bonded to those people. So,
and in some cases, you're actually putting your safety and your life in their hands. I mean, when you're in the backcountry, you really are trusting each other. So that's a real bonding experience for sure.
The climbing metaphor: who's on the other end of your rope? Who are you gonna trust to get out there? And I have made a lot of friends through ultra running. It's one of one of the things, I'm a nomad. I go to a lot of different places, and I've been established in Vancouver for maybe 15 years, a little bit more, but I travel a lot, and I'm not always in Canada. But one of the things that brings me back here is there's such a strong community of people who are adept and skilled, talented, visionary when it comes to doing adventures, and who will go out and get into uncomfortable places or take on long routes that take great imagination and creativity. So that experience, like going through Moab, actually Bigfoot. When I did Bigfoot, I ended up running most of the course with Wes Rittner at one point, because I was waiting for Alicia, my pacer, at one thing, and she was running behind schedule. So eventually I was like, I can't wait longer. So I took off, and a mile or two down the road, Wes was coming running back the other way. I'm like, what are you doing? Because he'd left the aid station early. He said, basically said, my headlamp broke. I'm like, you don't have a backup? He said, no, I don't have a backup. I'm like, well, I got one if you want to use it. It's not the greatest headlamp, but if you want to jump in with me, let's just go. Then you don't have to run back. He's like, okay. And we stuck together for the next 150 miles or whatever. And then I went out and paced him I wasn't actually pacing him. I was pacing Jovica Spatznik, this elite runner who'd come out over to run Moab, and he wanted a pacer, and it ended up he had run the entire course with Wes. So again, you've got these connections with people who are lifelong friends after that. And he's just like, hey, we shared some stuff out there, and we shared some time. So, and you can find people like that through ultra running groups, through running stores, through races, volunteering at racing and pacing at racing are two things that you can do if you're curious to get in at any point. Yeah. Pacing is maybe the best thing ever, because you jump in with somebody who has, they've burned some cycles already. So they're not fully fresh. And then the pressure is off you to run fast, and you're there purely in a supportive role. It does not cost you anything, like an arm and a leg, to get in. You can usually take advantage of the aid stations, and you're really, really helping someone out. The other thing is working or volunteering at an aid station and seeing all the people come through and go through. It's inspirational. It's fantastic. And you make connections. So those types of things, Facebook groups and areas, that's a good way to do it as well.
Yeah, pacing and crewing is one of the best ways to learn about those logistical things we spoke to earlier around 100 milers. I paced a friend at 100K before I ran 100K. I paced a friend at 100 miler before I ran 100 miler. And I got to see, okay, this guy's done this before. So how's he packing his drop bags? Like, oh, I see what he's doing with this food. I mean, you learn so much. Plus, I got to run half the Hard Rock course without having to get into Hard Rock. I mean, you can see, and then you can go back and run these races and feel like, well, I've already done half of it. So pacing is hands down the best way to learn and to preview what the next level, the next progression will be, for sure.
You can run 100 miles pacing a 200 and get your first 100 miles in pacing someone on a 200 miler.
In North America, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, we were talking about that earlier too. In Europe, I guess no pacing.
And actually, that's another thing. You mentioned like not having a spare headlamp. I mean, that's again where maybe it's there's this. The trails are typically more remote here in North America, but often not as mountainous as far as where you're racing. So the actual required gear in Europe tends to be much greater because you don't have a pacer. So I think somebody had asked about gear earlier. You typically need a lot, like Tour des Géants especially, we needed a lot of gear, like, winter gear, crampons. We were carrying crampons. I didn't use them, but we had to carry them. So I had to have a big
Hill Sound type crampons, Hope?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 20-liter pack, waterproof gloves, waterproof pants. Like, you had to have it all.
Wow.
Whereas spare. I mean, that's where I was kind of thinking, like, he didn't have a spare headlamp. How did he get through inspection? Because, these European races, you need to prove that you have all that stuff and you're carrying it the whole time, or you're disqualified.
But even the inspection, maybe you'll do that once when you go in, but then there's drop bags, you rotate stuff, you're taking clothes off, you're leaving stuff behind. So stuff gets left behind.
That's true.
Not to pick on Wes, but when I was pacing him in the Moab and him in Jovica, we got to the last night and we left, and he all of a sudden he says, I I don't have my headlamp with me. I'm like, I can't believe it. I had a spare lamp again. I'm like, guess what? I didn't remember it until a little bit later because I was also, you know, sleep deprived and 50 miles into my pacing. But yeah, that was pretty funny.
We've all been there at some point where the headlamp dies and you're like, can I follow you? Can I run behind you? And yeah, usually it happens once, then it never happens again. But you have to learn that lesson the hard way at some point. Christine, I can answer your question real quick about rim to rim to rim. In my opinion, at least, you want to go as early or as late as you can. If you want to not be where it's too hot, the only thing you're looking for is to make sure the taps are open, because the water taps only open after it starts to warm up and they close before they're going to freeze. So there is a sort of season for running the Grand Canyon as far as having access to those water taps, which you ideally would want. Carrie, what do you think on that? Is there a best time for you to run that, or would you agree on that?
I've done rim to rim to rim twice, and I've done rim to rim once. And there's big temperature changes that happen. I've been down at the bottom of Grand Canyon a bunch of other times at different routes. It's pretty warm down at the bottom, but at the rim, like I just did
it can be cold, right?
I did rim to rim a couple of years back, and I posted my doing it alone in winter. And the last couple miles up to the North Rim, I'm post-holing in snow, crusty snow, which was, subpar. Nobody had really been up there that day. So I wouldn't choose the middle of summer, and I wouldn't choose the middle of winter. So the shoulder season.
Sorry, to clarify though, when you went, were the taps on, or was that outside of the season that you went? Do you remember?
It might have been. I usually just carry everything that I need.
Okay.
Virtually, like I've got all the water I need, and I know roughly what I'll get. I just don't want to have to deal with it, which was a mistake one time when I went, because I was carrying so much water and so much liquid. It was heavy. And I kept going by, like, they said there was no water source. There's a water source. There's a water source. There's a water source. It seems like that's a well-supported route.
It is. There's taps, and there's lots of creeks when you're in the valley. And Christine, as far as the day or the time of day, we started, I think, around 5 or 6, and I think it was 5, and we were able to get the sunrise as we came down. It was beautiful. Whereas if you start too early, you miss the sunrise on the way down. So I think it depends on your estimated time on feet. The longer it's going to take you, obviously, the earlier you want to start.
Josh is asking me the last burning question. Are you wearing a Burning Man 50K t-shirt under the Tahoe 200? That would have been, now I'm looking back thinking I should have. I got him.
You peeled off a couple layers there, Carrie. I think everybody noticed how many layers you were peeling off there. I think you had 3 on,
right? 4 for counting. Here, I'll pop that there. Finish with a nice Burning Man one. I like the Burning Man shirts because they're so, here's actually another, as a content provider and a video producer and somebody who takes pictures out when I'm doing runs and things. For God's sake, people, wear your bright colors. Like the Moab shirt, don't wear this. You can't see that. This is actually pretty good. The Delirious one with all its colors, pretty good. Wear bright colors when you're outside and your pictures look way better and they're much easier to see on video.
Yeah, and it's easier in case something goes wrong. Search and rescue appreciate it too.
That's actually very true. Let's talk just for one quick second, dealing with injuries. I know you're just coming out of one, and it's really unusual to go into something 100% healthy. So what's your approach?
Well, and I can actually, this will tie back into another question Raphael asked about strength training. So I tore my hamstring. It was a grade 2 tear back in late November. And grade 2 is pretty bad. Grade 3 usually means surgery. So grade 2 was like a real tear. I couldn't walk for a few days without pain, and I didn't run for weeks. I was out. I had visible bruising on my leg. So I was sidelined. Fortunately, this was my off season, late November. So all it affected was my skiing. Right away, I went to physio, and I worked with a physio who happened to be a friend, Jackie, for a few weeks. And then she transitioned me over to a strength training, a personal trainer. And I've been working with him, with Adam, for a couple months now. So injuries happen. And that was probably due to some kind of underlying mobility issue that I had that I hadn't addressed, because my volume wasn't very high at the time. I wasn't running a lot. I was skiing mostly. But anyway, it happened. And now I'm fully recommitted to strength training. And I've been really just trying to rehab it. So my goal right now is to come back stronger than I was. Not like almost as good. I want to come back stronger because I want to make sure this doesn't affect me. So yeah, injuries happen. When they happen, you got to jump on them. You got to spend the money. You got to invest the time. You got to work with the professionals. Go see a physio. Don't say, oh, I'll just see if it goes away. I mean, no, you got to jump on it because I've had too many injuries come back to haunt me later on. So I've learned my lesson. Yeah.
I'm maybe again slightly different in that I'm just a stubborn bastard. And it's like, I think I've had hamstring issues. I've had ankles. Yeah. I've had, various things. And I know like it's very unusual to be running and feeling 100%, like totally healthy. There's always something going on. I'm pretty sure I broke a little toe recently, dropping a water the day we went backcountry skiing.
Yeah, right.
On Seymour.
How is that, by the way?
It still hurts, and it hurts, but it's not stopping me from doing anything. So I know when I'm training, if I have something, a strain or something that's tight or feels like it's pulling or, an ankle or something like that, I will, you'll probably cringe in horror, but just pound it into submission. Just keep it going. And I think a lot of folks I know who are runners in distance just know that, hey, that's part of the deal. You're going to have stuff that hurts. If it never goes away, then you're going to have to deal with it, as Jeff says. But if it starts to slowly get better and better, then you can do it. Like my hamstring issues sometimes are, okay, I'm going to have to not run very fast at all, maybe even walk and, just do the best I can to kind of protect it and nurse it and hope that it goes away. So I will try and persist through things if I can. Although in a 200 miler, it's dangerous because if you have things like blisters or, a big ankle turn or something like that, and you try and pound it in submission and it doesn't, you're going to have potentially a tough day. So that's going to be.
I think the one thing too, though, is I think you take this for granted because you have a lot of experience, is you need to learn the difference between not good pain, but acceptable pain and bad pain. There's some pain that is like, well, that's not good. Like that is tendonitis, say, cropping up on me. You can't push through tendonitis. That's going to sideline you, or again, a strain or a tear. I mean, there's certain pain that is like, okay, I gotta abort this run. Where I got to drop from this race. And then there's other pain that's, I can push through it, like tightness or like, you're just sore from the workout the day before. There's certain pain so I think there is something that comes with experience and learning the difference between those two. And that can be harder. So I think if you're a newer runner, I would err on the side of caution. And when you have pain, assume it's a bad pain maybe. But
another interesting and related to the subject of the whole live stream here, which is filming. If you have an issue, sometimes those are the things that are the toughest to film because you're having someone address it, a medic at an aid station, or you're really trying to work something out on the trail. And maybe you've got the foresight to put your camera there and have it done, but some of that stuff gets glossed over. But just know that it's there. It actually happens. Alex asking what the favorite race we've done. What's your favorite race?
For me, it's Tour de Jean, hands down. Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to think about that one at some point.
There's no better of an event. It was my first 200, and I was told this by my friend Jackie, who had run it, who's also my physio. And it proved to be the case that it was setting the bar very high, and there's never going to be an event of that size and that distance that can live up to that one. It's a big field. There are thousands of volunteers. It's incredible. There's no such thing as a more supportive event. I can just say that. I mean, I don't know what it would be. It's expensive, and it's a big race. It's hard to get into as well. There's a lottery, but 100%. I mean, that is the race to put on your list, Carrie. Like, you would love it.
It's definitely on my list. Although things that are hard to get into it's just that extra hurdle to get through.
I know. And you can't sort of do it last minute. Having said that, there are spots for this year because of COVID. So
really,
you want to head to Italy in September, both the 330K and the 450K Tour de Glacier has spots. Yeah. And
Wow.
that one's a whole other level. That's got a little bit of route finding and things in it as well.
Huh. What's the date?
It's like September 9th or something, I think, usually around that week.
That's kind of
We'll talk later. I'll talk.
That's interrupting Burning Man and Viva Las Vegas. I don't know if that would be a sacrifice.
This is the opportunity cost thing we were talking about, right?
Exactly.
You can only do so much in a season. Yeah.
So favorite race for me, I would, oh gosh, I like them all very much. Like the hardest race I think might have been Bigfoot, simply because of terrain and remoteness and trails that are almost never used. I love just the scenic nature of Moab, because you go through so many different types of terrain and it's gorgeous. And it's just one thing after another in the most, huge wild setting that you can imagine. I love the vision of Tahoe around the whole giant lake up and down. It's just this big epic journey. And Delirious is something totally different. So it's really tough for me to say. Delirious is on the Bibbulmun track in southwestern Australia. And the area is, again, a lot of variety and weird things. Tingle tree forest. These trees have trunks that are like, I could hold a pair of trekking poles out and it's still not as wide as the trunk. It's just, it's magical. And the beaches and whatnot. So and Fat Dog here is amazing too. So there are.
Well, what if you had to run one, like if you could only choose one to run again, you
the only
one more race. And
the only two races I've done more than once are the Burning Man one, because it's just ridiculous. And it's, it's a lark to go out there and run, and you don't really have to run competitively. You can turn it into an adventure, which I've done, as you can see in the videos. And Vancouver 100, which I've done 4 or 5 times, because it's local, it's free, back and forth. If I was just going to do one more, I might have to go and do to repeat one of the 4 200s. I might have to repeat Delirious now that I've seen it, and just not have the meltdown on the first day, which slowed me down. Like now I'd be better prepared to go there and have a better showing. And I connected with a bunch of people there. So I've got a whole bunch of friends there that I consider, that to be a big bonus going out there.
Maybe I'll have to consider that one then as well.
Delirious is great. Now they're going to have the Unreasonable East and the Irrational South. The Unreasonable East, I think, is mountainous and interesting. The other one's sort of in wine country, and it's just not, the course doesn't look great. But the other one, if we can get into Australia again, that was a problem. So,
Alex, have you raced a 5K? Carrie, do you have a 5K PB? I don't. I've never raced a 5K.
My best 10K is about 37 and a half minutes. Okay. So you could extrapolate my 5K would be a little faster than half of that. So I don't know, let's say 38 minutes, 16, 17, 18. I don't know. My best mile is 4:52 or something like that. And I was in my 40s. So I've never really done that.
Okay. Yeah. I've never raced a 5K.
Just over 3 hours. So.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. This is speaking earlier about sort of this, moving up in distance too soon. I don't regret, but I kind of wish I had raced some shorter stuff earlier. Like I started running when I was 27 and probably peaked in speed in my early 30s. Like it's safe to say I can run long, but I'm not getting any faster, I don't think, as I approach my 40s here. And I kind of regret not having done some fast 10K times and, things like that. So I think, again, it's sort of that, like, you can't do it all, your body adapts to whatever distance you're doing, your muscle fibers literally change. So yeah, I kind of wish I would have, I wish I had an answer for you that I had a 10K, 5K PB time, but I don't. And whatever it's going to be now, it won't be what it could have been. Not that matters, but
you can still jump in and do it. And it's interesting.
Oh, I could jump in. Yeah. And do like a master's.
And we got friends who are extraordinary. You ever run with Jim Swadling locally?
No.
Jim? No. Oh my God. This guy's in his 70s. He is the fastest, most deceptively quick guy you've ever, and even Gene Dykes in his 70s, he's running sub 3 hour marathons. It's like, who are these people, man? Who are these people?
Yeah. I did a half marathon. I got a 1:23 half marathon time. That's my shortest race.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah, that's pretty
solid.
good.
I think that's faster than my half.
Yeah.
We're getting to the end here. We're going to wrap up. We got Indigo jumped on. Great shirt changes. Love you,
Yeah,
Deb. I love you too, Indigo, very much. And this is a bit of experiment. Jeff and I getting together. It's a different way of producing content. It's fantastic from our point of view because we're putting something up immediately, and there's not an interminable amount of editing. Like editing one of your 200 milers, how much time would you think you put into that?
Yeah, I'll spend up to 100 hours on a film. So this is refreshing to be able to put out content live. Yeah. And
probably roughly the same for me, although probably a little less because I do less editing, but my incompetence with the editing software compared to Jeff probably makes up for some of that. So I'm spending probably a little less time than him doing it, but it's still significant time. So this is a good way of putting stuff together. I will also say, I'll repeat, if you have not gone over to Jeff's channel, do that. He puts out incredible content, and subscribe. If you're not a subscriber to my channel, please do subscribe, hit the bell, hit notification. Offer the video a thumbs up. It helps in the algorithm. And if you're willing to share it with people, that would be great. Oh, a shout out from Raphael with Danny and the crew at Mediocre Amateurs. That'd be fun, actually. Mediocre Amateurs, there are people. They would, that would be a fun adventure to jump in.
That'd be fun to go with those guys. That's a great channel. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're like wild enough that it would be totally entertaining to go out and do something. So yeah, that would be a fun one. I like the collaboration thing. We should do more. And if folks have suggestions, let us know, because this is, like I say, it's a format that's easily duplicatable. In terms of investment, it takes way less energy than filming something out in the wilderness and coming back. So thanks for coming in, and thanks for the questions. It looks like we got about 44 people on right now watching, which is kind of cool. Anything you'd like to say at the end here, Jeff?
No, I mean, I think, if you have any suggestions for specific topics you might want to see in the future, we could do this again, maybe a little more focused on one topic. We kind of bounced around a lot tonight. So
a lot.
We covered quite a bit. So, we could drill in a little more deeply on any one of those topics, probably, and talk for a good hour on any one of the things we touched on tonight.
when we get together on the trail, it's a great discussion the whole time about all kinds of stuff.
3 hours goes by pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is, what are we at? We're at 7:15. What time we start? 5:30. Actually, we've been going for an hour 45. That's solid, dude.
Yeah, that's good. We can talk. Well, thanks for the questions, everyone, as well. This has been great. It seems like we had a different sort of experience levels as well, which is nice. Some newer runners by the sounds of it, and presumably some much more experienced runners as well. That's always great to see.
All right. So folks, again, appreciate your eyeballs, appreciate your attention. Send suggestions our way. Leave a comment down below if you've watched it and got to the end of this video. That's a nice way for Jeff and I to take a look and see what happens. And go to his channel, watch his videos. They are muy impressive and cool to watch. I enjoy them myself. So it's Carrie saying goodbye. Jeff, you want to do the final words?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, and thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carrie, for hosting. This has been fun.
Cheers. Go out and do something tough. Run some miles or do something. Climb the hill.
See you guys in the trail.